Hey, welcome to The Long Game. We are on a mission to demystify the science that shapes our lives and to unpack how great ideas built here in Scotland become real world medicines, devices, and new companies at the cutting edge of life sciences. Hey, everybody, I'm Ross Kagan, Regis Professor of Precision Medicine at University of Glasgow.
And I'm Sandy Weir, Tech Innovation Leader and Strategic Program Manager, joining from Edinburgh. Lovely to see you, Ross.
Hey, Sandy. Lovely to see you as always. On The Long Game, we explore the collision of cells, code, and capital in the Scottish life sciences sector. And today, Sandy, we're going to look at a disease that scares people maybe more than any other. And that's a hard task to do. It steals our time, it steals our identity and our resources. And I'm talking about dementia.
The scale is difficult to wrap your head around. So globally, cases are expected to hit, wait for this, 153 million by 2050.
Yeah, that's just sometimes we throw around big numbers and they lose their meaning. So 153 million is a proper country, says a guy living in a country with 5.5 million. So in Scotland, speaking of which, in Scotland alone, dementia accounts for roughly 1 in 10 of all deaths. And we had talked about this. So it sits there. Basically, it's tied number 2 now with cardiovascular. And because the population is aging, the numbers are increasing every single year. So it's not the case that it's getting more common because something has happened. We're just getting older and we're aging into dementia. But today, we're not just going to talk about these nasty and grim statistics, although we are going to talk a little bit about those. But we will look at some, I think, pretty surprising new science that suggests maybe dementia is not an inevitable part of aging.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'll be acing on the grim statistics in this podcast.
Yes, that's you, my friend.
So I'll be trying to break down the staggering economic costs, which fundamentally different from the previous dives we've done on cancer, on heart disease, and the way that they cost the economy. And we'll be looking at what Scottish companies are leading the charge on in terms of diagnostics. So let's dive into it then, Ross. How about you start with the biology and give people a little bit of background on Alzheimer's, dementia, and give us the 101.
Yeah, of course. And I have to say, my lab has taken a little side march into it, so I know a little bit about this. And actually, so dementia is an umbrella term for a whole range of progressive neurological disorders. And in recent years, as brain imaging gets better and better, we're really beginning to understand that that's the case. So Alzheimer's, which is, I think, what most people think of when they think of dementia or neurodegenerative disease, that's the most common, maybe 2/3 of cases. And in Alzheimer's, toxic amyloid proteins, so some of you have heard A-beta protein, that comes from amyloid, and tau, tangles, they build up in the brain. The simple way to think about that is that amyloid beta, which is sort of a clipped portion of the protein, it gums up the spaces between brain cells and disrupts communication between those neurons. Tau, on the other hand, sits inside the cell, collapses the internal transport tracts, and so the cells gradually lose their ability to connect, to function, and so eventually they die, although that's probably the very end game of what's already a big problem. And I should also say that Alzheimer's breaks into several groups. There are the Baptists, which believe it's all about A-beta. There are the Taoists, who believe it's all about tau. There's also people who are about brain inflammation, people who call it type 3 diabetes. But there are other things that are not clearly Alzheimer's. A very common one is vascular dementia. So my father, as I've mentioned in the past, this is what he had. That's due to reduced blood flow in the brain. And actually, if you have a stroke, you're at much, much higher risk of having vascular dementia later on. There's Lewy body disease. Some high profile people have died of that, frontotemporal dementia, and so on. Recently, Ted Turner, really a legend in media, he died of Lewy body disease. Actually, the one I remember the most is Robin Williams. So when he first died, he took his own life. It was reported that it was due to depression. But actually, I attended, because we were working on this, I attended a dementia conference and actually sat down and had lunch with his widow. It turns out that he had Lewy body disease as well, and that's where the depression came from. He also had some very severe anxiety, Parkinson-like symptoms, hallucinations, and really talking to his wife and what it was like to go through this. just amazing how brave she was to deal with all of this by herself. But also, it was amazing to just hear the stories of what being a caretaker is like.
But the narrative has always been that you can't do much about it when you get these diseases. It's just genetics and unfortunately bad luck. Is that still true, Ross?
First of all, I should say that 50% of all PhD students for the previous decade had come into biology to neuroscience. So we're going to see over the next 10, 20 years, I think, just a explosion of understanding and new treatments. And we're already seeing this. So the Lancet Commission they just released a landmark update on dementia, and they estimate that nearly half, about 45% of all dementia cases, can in principle be either prevented or delayed.
So that's going to be big news to a lot of people listening. Almost half of all cases are preventable. And how is that?
Yeah. And that's an important take home message. It's not just us hanging around helplessly, flipping a coin and seeing what happens to our brain. We really can do things to it. I'm sure you're not doing that, going home, flipping a coin and saying, up, tails, today's a bad brain day.
Every night, Ross, every night. That's what
I think we kind of all do that. What the Lancet Commission did is they pointed to 14 very specific modifier risk factors, and maybe we'll put up a list. I don't think we want to grind through it here, but just to point out a few that you can change: smoking, obesity, physical inactivity. Interestingly, social isolation, really important that's an issue. And you had actually discussed this on your Wee Bit of Joy, yeah? The newest ones that they've added, the first one is high LDL, the so-called bad cholesterol. And the second one, and when I say it out loud, you won't be shocked, but it's the one I've been thinking the most about, is untreated vision and hearing loss.
Yeah, that'll be hugely surprising. But why does vision loss affect your propensity to develop dementia?
Yeah, and this is, I think, an important point for today's podcast. I think it's something to think about because we all know, for example, we have an elderly parent or a friend and they break their hip and then they decline rapidly. It's kind of in that range. The idea here is cognitive reserve. So if you lose your hearing or your vision and you can't correct it, your brain gets far less stimulation from the outside world. Your world and all that input starts to shrink. You become socially isolated, and the brain literally starts to atrophy from lack of use. And this is a problem. If they lose their hearing, at some point they're tired of saying what, and so they just withdraw, and then that's a sort of a vicious feed-forward cycle.
It's an incredible area that we can, I'm sure we've got a lot more learning to do in this space.
Yeah.
But what does the demographic breakdown look like for Scotland, Ross?
The demographic breakdown in Scotland, it's heavily skewed towards women. So 64%, almost 2/3 of dementia deaths are women in Scotland. And importantly, it's a disease that really starts changing the brain decades before symptoms appear. So by the time somebody forgets their keys or they get lost or they're standing in front of the fridge wondering, why am I here? Actually, the biological damage has been accumulating.
This is worrying because I did that exact thing this morning. I stood in front of the fridge and wondered why I was there.
Are you kidding? There's like footprints painted in front of my refrigerator while I just stand there and stare going, I'm sorry, why am I here? So my favorite dementia study is the Nun study. And I recently checked before we did this podcast to make sure that they hadn't discredited or anything. No, it's absolutely considered to be on target, and people have even followed up and filled it in. And I do remember when this first came out, it was back in 1996, so a few years ago, actually 30 years ago. And researchers looked at short autobiographies written by women who were applying to go into a nunnery. Okay. And so you had to write a essay, why I want to be a nun, basically. And so they collected these essays, median age 22, but some of them were 17, 18 years old even. And what they looked at was the complexity of their writing. And then they looked at these women who are now 80-ish, so 50 plus years later, almost 60 years later, and they asked who developed dementia. And with shocking accuracy, they could predict, even on a blinded panel, they could predict with crazy accuracy who was going to develop dementia 60 years later based on the structure of their writing. And actually, the way it's being described now is being a little is shaded slightly differently. The way it was described originally was if you have short declarative sentences and you're really to the point, you're in big trouble. But if you have flowery prose or your sentences go on and on and on and so on and so forth, then you're fine. And so when I started to discuss this study with people, of course, everybody immediately went to their writing style. But I think we're taught to write short declarative sentences, especially as scientists. So it's not clear. I, I'm hoping that one does not cause the other. So now the way they describe it is, because that would be a problem. I write in very direct declarative sentences. Now the way it's described is each sentence has lower idea density, so fewer concepts per sentences. And if you do that, then it's heavily linked to worse cognition and a much higher risk of Alzheimer's pathology later in life. So while this doesn't mean you can diagnose dementia in your 20s reliably, although it's pretty amazing how accurate they were, it does suggest that maybe Alzheimer's is something that is just built into our brains. Now, it could be that when you're young, through your teens, the schools you go to and so on change the way your brain is. So there could absolutely be environment. It is very striking, though, how much of a connection there is between the two. So in other words, early cognitive reserve, education, language, a rich mental life, that may help, but it's not clear whether this low idea density reflects just you have lower brain reserves, which would be me, or that your simple sentence structure suggests very early stages of the disease that you're seeing it, but it doesn't play itself out for decades later. So I don't know, Sandy, what do you think about that?
I was thinking about the feedback I used to get from my English teacher about my unnecessarily wrong sentences, my flowery language. And I should have I had a get out. I could have said that, I'm preparing myself for the future. And she should have done the same.
We are officially giving everybody permission to use this on study
Exactly.
sections with your parents, with your teachers. Have at it.
Yeah, indeed. But no, I think it's a really fascinating topic, and it's one that of course we've got so much learning to do. The nun study is it's incredible. It's fascinating. You've told me about it before, and that was my first introduction to it. But yeah, I still get quite blown away when we talk about it. And it kind of I guess it kind of brings us back to the kind of what is the position in terms of the ultimate commercial and economic problem, because we catch it so late, it really becomes quite a significant cost to us in terms of the economy. So not just we regularly go back and we look at not just the personal cost, the individuals that are involved, but also the wider cost and the we're trying to tackle the treatment and the economics of healthcare as well. So breaking that system down.
Yeah. And first of all, I have to say, I had forgotten that I told you that nun story. So this is
No,
worrying me to
it's
no
great.
end. But on the economic point, so, tell us what is the actual price of dementia? It's actually
Yeah, I mean,
complicated. Yeah.
who forgets a good nun story, right? I mean,
Well, I'm Jewish, so I only have one nun story. That's all I have.
I don't know if I could beat one more than one either. I guess in the UK, coming back to the serious topic, in the UK right now, I guess it's estimated that the impact of dementia is something like £42.5 billion a
Wow.
year. It's a
That's
staggering
crazy.
number. And here's the really scary part. It's projected to more than double to over 90 billion by 2040. So this is not just an NHS bill. This is kind of the complete kind of spectrum across hospital care, social care, unpaid care from families, and the wider economic impact when people, reduce their hours or have to leave work, or people have to leave work to go and care someone that of course, they deeply love.
Yeah, that's got to be really difficult to just drop your life.
Exactly, exactly. And there's estimated to be now nearly 1 million people living with dementia in the UK, and that's expected to rise to 1.4 million by 2040. So again, big numbers. If we just look at Scotland on its own, the usual estimate is around 90,000 people living with dementia, and that is kind of broadly split. Around 3,000 of those are aged 65 or under.
Well, that's
So
crazy.
yeah,
That's a
quite
problem.
a significant portion with
Yeah.
early onset dementia. And of course, the costs of this disease, they climb sharply as the disease progresses. So mild dementia may cost, several thousand per person per year. But once you get into that severe dementia, and of course the complexity of care increases, the costs can typically exceed something like, £80,000 annually, once you've taken into account the sort of complex care, etc., that's required.
80,000? That's gotta be financially crushing to a lot of families. I don't think a lot of families have that money just lying around.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, that's a huge stress in the family, the emotional cost, but then of course the kind of the financial impact as well. Europe is a pretty similar pattern to Scotland and the UK. So Alzheimer's Europe estimates around 9 million people currently living with dementia across the EU. It's similarly rising to around 14 million by 2050. So similar rates of increase, 50, 60%. So when we talk about dementia, we're not just talking about the memory loss and the sort of social impact around the person's ability to be able to operate normally within society. We're also talking about the really strongly defining health, social care, and economic challenges that will affect all of us over the next 25 years.
Wait, so I'm just thinking about this. So Scotland, 42 billion cost to the UK. Is that mostly hospital beds? Is that medications?
No, and this was what makes dementia quite unique in this space. It's a substantial amount of that, more than 60% of that total cost is not paid by the government. It's borne by the patients themselves and their families, and that's the backfilling of the care that's required. So it's social care, it's unpaid care, it's people taking time out, quitting their jobs early to look after their parents. That's where the majority of the cost is coming from. And in Scotland, care homes, they're effectively forced to act as hospices in this regard. So really looking after, people that are struggling, the final stages of their lives. And there is an estimate that nearly 2/3 of all Scottish dementia deaths are happening in care homes.
Wow.
Facilities, Ross, that were never designed for those complex needs and for that complex end of life neurological care that's required.
Sandy, I was just at a fundraiser recently, actually with Andrew Biancan for a care home. And that's exactly right. That was clearly the dominant patient population in this care home. So obviously, I mean, what are the options here? The economic incentive must be to catch the disease early to try to cut down on some of this. So I guess given the long game, what's the biotech ecosystem doing about this?
Exactly. Yeah. So we're back to what can industry do?
Yeah.
What can we do about this? So I guess what we see is that industry is pivoting from managing that decline to really focusing on early detection. We think that the drugs are coming, that we expect that we'll be able to really truly impact the and benefit people that are suffering from these diseases. At ECR this year, we saw that. I guess for everybody that doesn't know what ECR is, that's the European Congress on Radiology. We saw Eli Lilly and Siemens Healthineers. They were co-sponsoring the first dedicated Alzheimer's Day to highlight how AI and advanced MRI can spot these brain changes early before the symptoms start to become real to the individual.
I've seen some of the scans, their ability to track them. I know that there's even dyes that can mark tau and so on and catch it really
That's right.
early.
That's right.
Probably at some point we'll do an imaging podcast where we talk about some of these things. My expertise, of course, is more on the drug side, which I believe is also moving fast, including here in Scotland. So, for example, Sandy, have you seen what Craig Ritchie is doing?
I know quite a lot of Craig's work because I followed it in this space, but I think the Scottish Brain Sciences is one of the organizations that Craig is deeply involved in. So yeah, absolutely, I'm aware of some of it. But you're going to tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, so I haven't met Craig. I'm more on the cancer side these days. He did spin out of Scottish Brain Sciences, not him personally, but he has spun his efforts out of Edinburgh. And they just opened an enormous new clinical research center at, we talked about this, the One Biohub in Aberdeen. And we talked about this, of course, because our buddy Deborah O'Neill is involved as chair of One Life Sciences, which One Biohub is part of. So the amazing news, the reason I'm bringing it up is they are running the very first clinical trial in the UK and Europe for a new Alzheimer's vaccine. This has got to be one of the answers to all of this. It's such a steady march, march, march. It's hard to imagine you're going to be taking a drug for 30 years just to try to reduce, Alzheimer's, which is kind of what's happening right now. So an active immunotherapy that Craig is running is aimed at preventing or slowing the progression of the disease by basically encouraging the immune system to clear out the disease forms of tau. And I should say, in the world of Baptists versus Taoists, I'm probably a Taoist, and that is the most linked to neurodegeneration. And so to me, this makes sense. So it's really different than the treatments that you see from targeting beta amyloid. And another difference, and this is, I think, the most important difference, although since I just talked about the nun study, we may have to dial that further back, which is they're targeting participants age 55 to 75 with preclinical Alzheimer's disease. And you were just talking about our ability to detect these. So the two are going to work hand in glove. So these are people who are cognitively normal, but the brain scans show they have a big buildup of tau pathology, so the tau tangles. And the idea is to prevent further sliding into dementia, or any sliding in dementia, hopefully, that these folks are actually at a risk for.
Yeah, that's so important, Ross. And one of the problems that I've seen in this disease is the difficulty in getting a clinical diagnosis. And getting a clinical diagnosis for dementia and Alzheimer's in particular is quite challenging. It requires some spinal fluid to be taken and analyzed for the appropriate biomarkers. There is an alternative where you can use PET imaging in order to be able to quantify the effects that we
Do you
see
think that'll be the
in the
future,
brain.
Pet?
Exactly. But that complexity of diagnosis, and therefore the opening of that pathway to treatment, there's a fantastic opportunity for industry to look at that and to reduce that complexity, to speed that whole area around diagnosis, to allow people to get treatment much earlier, because we know, like many other disease, earlier intervention, early treatment is the best outcome. And so if you can catch this disease early, and I believe particularly these initial drugs that came on the market, that really started to turn the dial, and we could see some very modest, but nonetheless important
Yeah.
changes.
It reminds me of, so with, drugging KRAS in cancer was just undoable. Everyone had tried, everyone failed. But once they had that first breakthrough with the Kayvan Shokot paper, and then the first company pushed it through for a very specific use, and it wasn't super durable, but patients got months, that kind of opened the floodgates. And then it just began to refine, and people were just convinced this is actually doable. Whereas I remember, you probably remember, not so long ago, Alzheimer's was considered a no-no and a graveyard
That's right.
of effort, even though everybody knew it was a huge market, simply because it was just failure after failure. So even a mild success actually matters in terms of encouraging companies to get at it. What do you think?
You're so right. You're absolutely right, Ross. I do feel like we're at that same cusp, and we're going to see those changes come through. And there's a fantastic opportunity. And of course, that's exactly what the 25 billion Scottish Life Sciences target is all about, right? So it's about keeping that world class research going in tandem with the commercial opportunity and the commercial value. And we can be part of that solution right here in Scotland.
Yep, totally. So, my friend, let's boil this down. Let's give some practical advice for our listeners, because we are can-do people here at the Long Game. Why don't you start?
Well, let me try. It's not just about curing the disease. There's also, other excellent objectives that we can focus on. And we really should be encouraging folks to look at the spectrum of opportunity there and to build the right digital tools that can really help to not just find cures and treatments, but also to help uncared carers, to provide better remote monitoring that can help dementia patients to stay in their own homes, for example. So yeah, when we're looking at the different opportunities and solving that multi-billion-pound problem, there are lots of different things that we can bring to the party.
Sure. And my advice from the clinical side, it would be much more personal. And it goes back to what we talked about before, that nearly half of dementia is modifiable. I won't say preventable, but let's say modifiable. Basically, protect your cognitive reserves. So if you notice that your hearing is fading, take it seriously. Get a hearing aid. There are other options. Cochlear implants are apparently starting to come on the table. Don't tough it out. Get your eyes checked. Make sure your vision is as good as it can be. Sandy, keep your blood pressure and cholesterol down. Okay, so that means extra sausage rolls because they'll help clean that out. And most importantly, stay socially engaged. Your brain needs conversation. You need conversation and connection, not just to improve your quality of life, which is a very good reason, but keeping that brain young, keeping it working.
Yeah, hopefully we're not about to discover the terrible connection between sausage rolls and early on stage.
I'm hoping it's the other way. Remember in Sleeper, where they determined that high-fat meat was actually the secret to longevity? And I'm hoping that more sausage rolls.
There's a fantastic future we could all look forward to.
We'll all be forced to eat daily sausage rolls just to keep our health up.
So overall, that was excellent advice. Please don't listen to the sausage roll part, but excellent advice from Ross. But Ross, as always, these are heavy topics that we tried to discuss and deal with on the podcast. But now a different sort of form of empowering. It's time for our closing segment. It's a wee bit of joy. Oh, do you want me to go first today? I don't know.
Yeah, why don't you go first? Because I know you are busting to share something.
Yeah, my wee bit of joy this week has to be the Football World Cup.
Of course it is. I know what your wee bit of joy is going to be. Yeah. Come on, you're a Scot.
That's right, Ross. Football. We're not talking about soccer here. You know, controversial. Given this, the US are hosting
we're going to have
this
out.
But yeah, we got to be faithful to the origins of the game. So football is the right way to call it.
And can I just say?
Yeah.
I won't go on a rant. Another time. Up through the mid-90s, here in the UK, I looked this up, they called it soccer. They only changed when the US started to call it soccer, and they're like, screw those guys, we're going to come up with a different name, we're going to call it football. Look it up, my friend.
Do you remember our previous episodes where I've talked about AI hallucination? I'm sure it's not escaped you, Ross, but as Scots, we've got a very long and complex relationship with this tournament. We've qualified to play in the finals 9 times over since the 1950s when it was really kind of took off. And that's more than many other nations, surprisingly, more than Denmark, more than Japan, more than a really amazing sporting nation like Australia, for example. However, although we've qualified 9 times, Scotland has never made it out of the group stages of the competition. We're struggling to overcome that barrier.
It's a little
In fact, if I look at the peers, if I look at all those other countries that have appeared in the competition 9 times or more, the lowest place finish of any of those countries that have qualified as many times as Scotland is 4th. I mean, we've never got out of the group stages. All those other countries that are qualifying as often as us, those 4th place countries include Russia, Serbia, South Korea. So, what's holding us back? I'm not sure. You ever thought about this, Ross? Are you aware of our history on this?
So, no. Only thing I ever really heard till I came here was about the Tartan Army. That did make it across the Atlantic. We can talk about that, which I think is arguably the coolest thing about Scotland. So give yourself something on that. But no, other than that, I didn't learn about the Scotland tradition of struggle, shall we say. I was going to say incompetence, but that's mean.
Yeah, definitely struggle.
I didn't realize they had never gotten out of the group stage. That's hard to do, actually.
Yeah, struggle with a capital S, I think, is definitely the way I'd characterize it. Well, as you know, I was in the US last week, and I got back on Saturday around noon, and the first game in the competition that Scotland were involved in was kicking off 2:00 on early hours of Sunday morning. So I had a wee rest in the afternoon, I had a lovely dinner with my family and friends in the evening. And then I had an early night, and I got up in the middle, felt like the middle of the night, jet lagged, tired, bleary eyed to watch the game. And I didn't take any coffee or any other supplements because I didn't want them to prevent me from going back to sleep. I was desperate to get a good night's sleep. However, something drove me, I guess, my curiosity. Can we do it this time? And so I got up in the middle of the night to watch it. Let me tell you, it was a tough night. It felt like a comfortable game for what seemed like about 7 minutes, and then for the rest of the great game, I felt like my nerves were
This was
shredded.
against Haiti, right?
Yes, against Haiti. You haven't even got to that part yet. Yeah, we're playing Haiti. Like a side who are ranked, I think, 83rd in the world, but they played a lot better than that. They were very physical, very actually pretty skillful guys. It was quite amazing. So Scotland were very fortunate to score. It was a scrappy goal. They've introduced these water breaks that came after a short water break around the half hour, 28-minute mark. Awesome, fantastic, more than we could have hoped for. And then what happened next was about 62 minutes of, it just seemed inevitable that Haiti would score.
Uh,
Even a long period of extra time as well, 8 minutes of extra time. Somehow we hung on, survived it. It's a great position to be in now. We've got an excellent opportunity to emerge from this group
you guys are
for
in
the
first
first time.
place, right? Or I guess we are in first place,
Yeah,
yeah?
yeah. I wouldn't get too excited about that yet because we've got some very tough games coming up. We've got the African champions, Morocco. We've got the five-time winners, Brazil, and we've got a long history of playing Brazil in this competition. And let me tell you, Ross, it's not a good record. So Sunday morning was tough, and I don't know how I'm going to hold together my nerves for the next two games. But please, Ross, if you're tempted to adopt anything else about your life in Scotland, please don't become a Scotland football fan. It's a terrible affliction. There are many great things our country can offer, but being a Scotland football fan really isn't good for your health.
Scotland sounds like the Philadelphia of Europe because I'm stuck with Philadelphia and they're just one doormat after another. It's like, oh my God.
Dear,
All
yeah.
right. So, and as I
What about
get to,
you, my friend? What's been your wee bit of joy this week?
okay. So I'm going to pick up a theme from our last episode. Last time I talked about the joy of sinking deeply into a culture like Kobe. Remember this discussion? So after that, my wife and I flew from Japan to New York to visit family.
Yeah, back to your old stomping grounds, I guess, Ross.
Yeah, exactly. So we both grew up there. We lived in the city for many years before we moved to here. So we moved to Scotland 2 days before the pandemic lockdown 6 years ago. That was a little unexpected. We didn't have an apartment. We ended up staying with friends for what turned out to be over 4 months, all of that. So visiting a city, New York, once or twice a year that you know so well after being away kind of has a fascinating vibe. Just wanted to say a few things about that.
So yeah, you had a nice time catching up with family. So how was all that then?
That's a key point. So I have family there. One of my two daughters is there. The other one's actually in Vienna at the moment. The younger one, who's in New York, is in medical school. That's when he used to be an artist. My sister lives there. My mother lives nearby. It's one we were talking about with cochlear implants and so on. So yeah, my family. And of course, lots of friends there, which we still visit. And so going back in there, so we go there about once or twice a year. And what that means is that New York is always changing. So they've got about 28,000 restaurants. And with a natural turnover, side note, you could eat the same restaurant for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and a late night snack for the rest of your life, for your entire life. And not only would you never have to eat at the same place twice, but you would actually lose ground based on the natural turnover. Things are always changing there. And so in a weird way, I know most of it, but then there's these changes. And so they feel very new and exciting because they sort of pop in. And yet I still get to absorb the flow of the overall energy of the place. The thing I really love the most about New York is just walking through it. I absorb that energy. And for example, in the morning, by the time I get to lab, I'm like, yeah, let's do this. Just get super energized.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds incredible environment, Ross, and I guess growing up in Scotland, the sort of culture of New York was always on our television screens, and it always looked so enticing and different
Not
and
gritty and
exciting.
crime ridden.
So yeah, well, there were a lot of cop shows as well, I've got to say. But yeah, on the whole, it looked very invigorating and enticing and exciting to be in.
Absolutely. Well, the purpose of this was to visit family.
Mm.
We had a great time. Drove down to Philadelphia to see my mom, hung out with my sister. Everybody's doing great. Big highlight was spending time with my younger daughter. So she was originally a professional artist. She actually did quite well, even with Fairleigh Bias, had a piece in the Museum of Modern Art, all of that. And then one day decided I've had enough of this art world and went ahead and took science classes and went to medical school. Just finished up her second year of medical school. She just very impressive. Watching her move through her adult life, she's already lived more of a life than I have. And it's just so great. It's astonishing how a great person, she is. And just watching the world spin forward, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I do. Very much like yourself, I see my children becoming better human beings than I feel I am myself, and
It's the
it's
purpose.
lovely, and what gives you a lovely warm feeling, and it's really kind of inspiring.
No,
But
absolutely.
yeah, tell us about a little bit about some of your old haunts that you've been visiting, Ross.
So this is, of course, where I want to go with all of this, right? Because as you know, I love shopping, right? Or at least art and clothing and all that's in clothing as art. And I should say that we had originally gone there to meet with my older daughter who lives in Vienna, who has also become an absolutely amazing person. She's in a lot of ways so much better person than I ever was. So yeah, we'll talk about her some other time. But to your question, let's talk clothing. So I make annual pilgrimages to a couple of magic stores. One is in Harlem. There's a Kangol hat shop. I think it's the only purely Kangol shop in the East Coast or the US or something like that. And I have probably way too many Kangol hats. I would recommend it. I'm going to have to bring you over there, Sandy, because as a Scot, you would absolutely crush a good Kangol hat because they have sort of a Scottish vibe to them. Also, my favorite designer clothing store, Descendant of Thieves. Wow, we're really getting into the weeds here, but why not? And they both of them recognized me as like, hey, that's that New York guy who lives in Scotland. They always, you would think they have so many customers they would forget, but honestly, every time I walk in, they're like, hey, you're that Scotland guy, and they bring other people. It's that guy lives in Scotland. Like, do they have lots of castles there and fairy glens? I'm like, absolutely, it's castles everywhere.
Yeah, you told them how many castles there are in Glasgow, Ross?
No. Oh, in Glasgow. Hey, have you been to my apartment? Every morning moat goes down and I leave for work. Honestly, when we first signed up for Scotland, that was my first reaction was, can we get a castle and can it have a moat, please? Because lowering that to go to work would be so epic. And of course, my wife was like, no, let's change the subject. We're not hiring somebody to clean this castle. It's not going to happen. So anyway, I digress because of you. That notice I dodged your question. Not famous for the large number of castles that it has.
Oh dear.
I hear you guys over in Edinburgh have a little castle over there.
Yeah, we got one or two. We got one or
Yeah,
two.
nah, not impressed. So anyway, I just want to finish this wee bit of joy with the second place that I always visit, which is this clothing place called Descendant of Thieves. Descendant of Thieves shirt right here.
Ah,
Beautiful, beautiful
cool.
material. Okay, they're all about material. And every year I walk in there, he's like, hey, you're the Scottish guy, so amazing. Every year he asks me to recommend a good Scottish whiskey because they often actually serve whiskey when you walk in there. And I, of course, dutifully as a Scot now say, what is this crap? And then give them a lecture on proper Scottish whiskey. He always writes down my recommendations. He then always loses that piece of paper every time, not once, not twice, every time. And then we have the exact same conversation the next time I visit. And so this time we finally acknowledge, all right, it's just our thing now. We're just going to go through this and he's going to lose the paper. And
Yeah, you're establishing a true transatlantic tradition there.
it really, honestly, I actually look forward to it.
Thanks, Ross. Thanks for that amazing, wee bit of joy. It sounds incredible. Gives us all something very positive for today. And yeah, thank you very much for tuning in to today's episode. And I hope you found this useful. I hope you'll share it with your colleagues, your families, and your friends, particularly the good tips that Ross gave for avoiding and sort of key signs of dementia and avoiding that terrible disease. But please tune in and keep our reviews going on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, and on YouTube. We love doing this every week, and it gives us great joy when we get a little bit of feedback from people as well. So please do write us a note or tell us what we're doing wrong and tell us what we can do better.
We do
Yeah.
appreciate it, yeah.
Thank you very much from me. What about you, Ross? What's your final word today?
My final word is, smash the like button. As Sandy said, please leave us a review and give us feedback. We really appreciate the feedback we've been getting. Until next time, everybody, including you, Sandy, keep the heed, and best of luck playing the long game. Ciao.
Bye.
Playing out the long game, the long